At the beginning of the movie, we follow the life of John, a dedicated architect who lives and breathes his work. Despite his comfortable financial situation, his personal life faces turbulent times. He and his wife, Emily, are constantly involved in arguments, leading them to the painful decision to live separately. This constant conflict deeply affects their son, Ben, an innocent child caught in the crossfire. Although young, Ben remains silent, absorbing the family tensions without complaint. On an ordinary day, while John inspects a construction site, a sudden memory hits him hard. It's Ben's birthday. Determined not to let this special day go unnoticed like the previous year, John decides to take a step toward reconciliation. With a heavy but hopeful heart, he goes to meet Emily. There, he does something unprecedented. He sincerely apologizes, acknowledging his mistakes and his role in their estrangement. Emily, surprised and moved by John's change in attitude, also apologizes, initiating a moment of healing for both. Reunited, the couple decides to give Ben the gift he wanted most, a united family. The calm is suddenly interrupted by an emergency alert on television. Urgent news announces that a meteor shower of astronomical proportions is about to strike Earth. The first meteor lands in the Bermuda Triangle, and the news arrives only minutes before the impact, which triggers shockwaves across the planet. The waves are so powerful that they create an earthquake-like sensation. Amid the chaos, John, sensing the danger approaching, goes out to investigate and is met by a blast of force, throwing him to the ground. The impact's effects are devastating. The sky fills with disoriented birds, and the integrity of buildings is threatened. Rushing back home, John alerts his family and neighbors to the dangers of subsequent meteors. Panic spreads as they worry about their family's safety and the uncertainty of what will happen next. John's phone vibrates with an urgent notification. The message is clear. His family has been chosen by the military forces to be evacuated to a safe location, a government emergency measure to protect select families. This news quickly spreads among the neighbors, causing resentment and envy. Many question why John's family was deemed special enough to receive this favor, while they were left behind to face the disaster alone. Rumors of John's selfishness begin circulating, but he, focused only on his family's safety, ignores them and follows the necessary procedures for departure. Meanwhile, Emily carefully prepares insulin injections for Ben, who is diabetic and will need them. Just as they are about to get in the car, a desperate neighbor appears, begging John to take his daughter with them. However, the protocol was strict. Only pre-selected individuals and families could be evacuated. With a heavy heart, John had to deny the request, intensifying the sense of abandonment that gripped the community. John and his family arrived at a military airport, where a clear scene of social division was unfolding. Politicians, business people, and other influential figures were escorted with priority, revealing a selection based on potential political or economic advantages. While influential families moved forward, ordinary citizens expressed their frustration and fear. Soldiers organized the flow of selected families. Amid the confusion, John and Emily realized that Ben's insulin injections had been left in the car. Without them, the boy's life was at risk. John insisted that Emily board with Ben while he ran back to retrieve the injections. Time was passing, and John did not return. As the departure time approached, the tension grew. Desperate, Emily approached one of the soldiers to explain the situation, hoping they could wait a little longer for John. When Emily explained the reason for John's delay, she accidentally mentioned Ben's diabetes. Immediately, the strict protocol of the operation was enforced, as soldiers informed her that people with medical conditions could not board that flight, according to rigid guidelines. Faced with this, they decided that Emily and Ben would be taken to a different location designated for cases like Ben's. Meanwhile, John was racing back to the airport with the essential insulin injections for his son. Upon arrival, he did not find Emily and Ben where he expected. Following orders, the soldiers refused to give him any information about their whereabouts. With the plane nearly ready to take off and the passengers being directed inside, John grew desperate, believing that Emily and Ben might already be on board. John entered the plane, frantic, searching every row for his family. Despite his efforts, he found no sign of them. Panic overtook him as he feared the worst, unsure of what would happen to them without the necessary medical support. Amid the confusion, a soldier saw John with the medication and questioned him about it. as anyone carrying medication would be redirected to another location. Upon revealing that the medication was for his diabetic son, John realized that Ben might have been relocated as a patient. Distressed, he begged the soldier to let him leave the plane and look for his family, but he was informed that the doors were already closed and no one could exit. Outside, the atmosphere among the people not selected for evacuation grew tense and angry. Crowds began to protest, demanding explanations from the government as to why only certain individuals were being taken to safety, while ordinary citizens were left behind to face an uncertain fate. In that moment of chaos, the soldiers found themselves without options and decided to use their weapons to control the enraged crowd, threatening to storm the military plane. The situation was critical, and there was a real risk that the aircraft would be overwhelmed and might even crash due to the turmoil. Meanwhile, the airport was overrun by a desperate crowd. Amid the chaos, Emily saw an opportunity to leave the area and decided to act. The widespread pandemonium and the desperate attempt by some people to force their way onto the plane only heightened the tension, culminating in a tragic accident. Several gas tanks were knocked over, triggering a massive explosion inside the military aircraft, claiming countless lives in a horrific scene. Terrified by the possibility that John was among the victims of the explosion, Emily focused on protecting Ben. She quickly wrote a note, leaving a message for John in case he survived. "I'm taking Ben home. If you see this, meet us there." Pinning the note to John's car, Emily, with Ben by her side, swiftly left the airport. John, for his part, miraculously survived the explosions, and upon returning, searched desperately for Emily and Ben without success. Fearing the worst, his heart only calmed when he reached his car and found Emily's note. He prepared to head home and reunite with his family. Meanwhile, Emily and Ben, now far from the immediate danger at the airport, found themselves on an empty road. With Ben complaining of hunger, Emily took him to a nearby supermarket to pick up some supplies. However, violence quickly found them again when a group of aggressive individuals entered the store, shooting without warning. Emily shielded Ben, running out of the store and narrowly avoiding yet another threat. Outside the supermarket, Emily spotted a car about to leave, heading in the direction of her father's house. Determined, she saw this as a chance to escape. In a moment of pure desperation, Emily, with her son Ben, made a plea to the driver passing by on the chaotic road. Urgently, she explained that her family had been selected for evacuation, but the soldiers had barred Ben from boarding due to his health condition. Moved by her story and the imminent danger, the driver agreed to help, allowing Emily and Ben to get into the car. During the ride, the man inquired about Emily's circumstances. She shared that her husband, John, was an architect chosen for governmental relocation to a safe zone. However, Ben's diabetes complicated the situation, preventing him from boarding. The driver expressed sympathy, lamenting the injustice of the situation. He suggested leaving Ben at a nearby military airbase, but Emily refused due to the risk of nearby explosions. Suddenly, the man's demeanor changed, becoming aggressive. He stopped the car, forcibly expelled Emily, and drove off with Ben toward the military base. Desperate, Emily shouted for help, but no one paid attention. She watched helplessly as the car disappeared into the distance with Ben. Meanwhile, John, determined to reunite with his family, was on his way to Emily's father's house in Canada. As he walked, he came across a group of teenagers trying to distract themselves with a rooftop party, despite the looming asteroid crisis. The young people were trying to enjoy their possible last moments, but John moved forward, facing the terrifying sight of falling asteroids and devastating shockwaves. He spotted a truck full of passengers heading toward Canada and quickly joined them. On the truck, John met Blake, who took an interest in his story. John explained that he was an architect looking for his wife and son. Blake then revealed that the government was evacuating only individuals deemed useful for the post-disaster period, such as architects and doctors. As John absorbed the information, Blake shared more about the government's strategy. He explained that the selection of individuals like John, an architect, was no coincidence. After the asteroid's devastating impact, it would be essential to rebuild everything, and professionals with specific skills would be crucial. Alongside architects, doctors like Blake's family members were also being preserved to meet future medical needs. The government's policy was clear: prioritize the survival of those who could significantly contribute after the catastrophe. Blake mentioned that chosen families were being taken to Greenland, where bunkers and facilities were already prepared to withstand the worst. Confused about the situation, Blake questioned why John, having been selected, was still on that truck heading to Canada. John explained that he had been separated from his family and that his priority was to find them. During the conversation, other passengers on the truck began to notice John. The contrast between their conditions and John's privileged position created tension. When it became clear that John was one of the chosen, frustration and despair took over the others, who believed that accompanying him might increase their chances of survival. The situation escalated quickly, with the group attempting to overpower John. John defended himself as best he could, but it seemed hopeless until Blake intervened, managing to pull him away from the enraged crowd. Unfortunately, in the ensuing chaos, Blake was tragically injured and lost his life, while John managed to escape, now even more determined to find his family. Meanwhile, the man who had kidnapped Ben, along with his wife, was trying to use Ben to gain access to a military base. They presented Ben, claiming that the chaos had caused them to lose their own identification documents. However, when pressured, Ben couldn't maintain the lie and tearfully revealed that he had been kidnapped. The soldiers quickly realized the truth of the situation and intervened, removing Ben from the imposters and taking him to a safe shelter, where he would wait for an eventual reunion with his mother. Emily finally found a stranger willing to take her to the military base, where she hoped to find Ben. As soon as they arrived, she quickly disembarked, her eyes scanning the chaos in search of any sign of Ben. She approached the soldiers urgently, describing Ben's characteristics in detail, hoping someone might recognize him. One of the soldiers, noticing Emily's desperation, informed her that all the children had been transferred to a shelter for safety. With her heart still tight, but now with a spark of hope, Emily rushed to the indicated location. The place was a whirlwind of activity, with children everywhere, and Emily called out for Ben, her voice filled with anxiety and love. Finally, a doctor approached her, his words bringing her the relief she desperately needed. "We gave your son insulin. He's safe here." Ben, relieved and happy, smiled as he felt the security of his mother's arms. Emily shared her father's address with a nurse and requested transportation there. The nurse assured her that she and Ben would soon be on a bus heading to that destination. Together, mother and son boarded the bus, finally setting off for Emily's father's home after hours of anguish. Meanwhile, John was also on his way, driving as fast as possible to the same destination. When he arrived, he found Emily's father, who was unaware of the imminent danger or the arrival of his daughter and grandson. The ensuing conversation was tense, with Emily's father expressing frustration at the risky situation. However, before the argument could escalate, John's phone rang. It was Emily, letting him know they were close. Relieved, John quickly shared the news with his father-in-law, and both prepared to meet Emily and Ben. They got into the truck, ready to finally reunite the family. John was finally reunited with his family. He and Emily embraced tightly. Ben, seeing his father, ran into his arms. John was already thinking about the next steps. Determined, John explained the need to head to Greenland, where secure bunkers awaited them. He believed that only there would they truly be safe from the devastating impacts of the meteors. Quickly, he began gathering supplies and food, preparing the family for the long journey ahead. However, when John spoke with Emily's father about the urgency of leaving together, he encountered resistance. The older man was determined to stay, accepting his fate. Emily tried to convince him, but he stood firm in his decision, leaving her heartbroken and in tears, realizing she would have to leave him behind to save the rest of her family. John, Emily, and Ben got into the truck and set off toward the airport, their hearts heavy but focused on survival. On the way to the airport, the situation quickly worsened. Small asteroid fragments began to fall from the sky, each capable of causing destruction. The landscape around them was one of total devastation, with damaged vehicles and victims scattered along the road. Arriving at the airport, the last flight to Greenland was just about to take off. Without losing a second, he drove the pickup truck directly in front of the plane, forcing the pilot to stop. With the plane halted, John and his family rushed aboard. John jumped out of the truck, waving his arms for Emily and Ben to follow him quickly. The three of them ran toward the plane. As they got closer, the pilot, visibly irritated, left the cockpit and confronted John with a furious look. John quickly explained his situation. The pilot sighed, understanding, and signaled for them to get on board. Once inside the plane, they were met with anxious glances from other families already seated. As the plane climbed, a sense of relief began to take hold. However, as they neared their destination, a terrible warning echoed through the cabin. A colossal meteor was on a direct collision course with Greenland. The asteroid, descending at a breathtaking speed, sent shockwaves that disturbed even the high-altitude flight. The pilot made desperate maneuvers to keep control of the aircraft, which began to shake violently under the influence of extreme turbulence. Without enough time for an evasive maneuver, the plane was forced to make an emergency landing in a rocky area, crumpling the front of the fuselage on impact. By a miracle, everyone on board survived without serious injuries. The passengers, still in shock, slowly exited the wreckage, relieved to be alive but quickly realizing they were not out of danger. Spotting a nearby military base, they were quickly escorted to a spacious bunker, prepared to withstand the worst of impacts. Scientists had predicted that a gigantic meteor was on a collision course with Earth, with the potential to wipe out a significant part of the world's population. The urgency of the situation drove them quickly into the bunker, where they settled in for the impending impact. The meteor finally hit, releasing shockwaves so violent they felt like a massive earthquake, shaking everything around. In the bunker, people felt the ground trembling violently underfoot. Panic spread as the sounds of destruction reverberated outside. Inside this underground fortress, John held Emily and Ben tightly as everyone braced for what was to come. In the bunker, darkness was absolute. Outside, everything was destroyed, as if humanity had been wiped out. Even so, scientists assured them this would be the last asteroid. There would be no more meteor storms. However, toxic gases still lingered in the air, rendering the outside environment uninhabitable for some time. The survivors in the bunker were ordered to remain confined for several more months, following strict safety protocols. After this period, and with the Earth's environment beginning to stabilize, the bunker doors were finally opened. Those who had lived underground, deprived of sunlight for many months, emerged slowly. However, what they encountered was a desolate sight. The world as they knew it no longer existed. Everything lay in ruins. Reconstruction would be a massive challenge. The government had carefully preserved only those considered essential for the economic and structural rebuilding of the planet: architects, politicians, doctors, and engineers. The general population, unfortunately, had not survived the cataclysm. John, now safe with his family, was among the survivors tasked with rebuilding civilization from what remained. Despite the discouraging circumstances, he began to envision a new life, full of challenges, but also of hope. And so the film ends. If you enjoyed this movie, I recommend watching this other one here as well. I'm sure you'll like it. See you there.